What's up, everyone? I am in need of some guidance on a problem that has absolutely gotten out of hand. I am 27 years old. It has been close to a year since I moved in with Jess, who is 26 years old, and my flatmate. We have experienced both highs and lows, but on the whole, everything has been going well until very lately. It all began when Jess's grandma passed away and left her this frightening antique doll. This was the beginning of everything. Since the doll has been in Jess's family for many generations, she is adamant that it is haunted and that it carries some sentimental importance. At first, I made an effort to be supportive. Nevertheless, from that point on, things started to become really strange. Jess was ecstatic when she finally got the doll in her possession and brought it home. For the first few days after she put it on a shelf in the living room, nothing out of the ordinary occurred. But then I started to become aware of some things. In spite of Jess's assurances that she had not touched the doll, it would be in a variety of positions when I returned home from work. The first thing that came to my mind was that perhaps she was simply shifting it about and forgetting about it, but then things started to grow more strange. The doll was positioned on the couch facing the television, which was set to static when I arrived home late one evening. I discovered it there. When I inquired about it, Jess simply shrugged her shoulders and stated that the doll must have enjoyed being in that location. While I was able to laugh it off, it still managed to give me the chills. As time went on, the situation became more serious. During the odd hours of the day, I would hear footsteps in the corridor and doors would shut on their own without my intervention. Despite Jess's repeated assertions, she insisted that it was simply the doll's method of settling in. I made an effort to disregard it, but then unexpectedly I awoke one night to the sound of someone laughing. The doll was lying on the floor in front of the door to my bedroom when I entered the living room and discovered it then. Yeah, that turned out to be the final straw. I told Jess that the doll was giving me the creeps, and I inquired as to whether or not we could relocate it to a different location. Her response was really defensive, and she stated that I was being ridiculous. Despite my suggestion that she put it in her room, she declined, stating that it should be in a public area so that it could watch over us. It was hard for me to see that she was being serious. After a very difficult day at work, I arrived home late on a night that was extremely difficult. As soon as I entered the living room, I noticed the doll sitting on the chair that I considered to be my favorite, while she was carrying one of my scarves. It passed me by. Immediately after grabbing the doll, I rushed out of the house and placed it into the shed in the backyard. Going back inside, I felt a mixture of relief and remorse as I locked the shed and headed back outside. The moment Jess returned home and learned the truth, she was enraged. She claimed that I had disrespected the traditions that she and her family had been practicing. I made an effort to convey to her how much the doll was giving me the creeps, but she refused to engage with my explanation. She walked outside, got the doll, and then placed it back on the shelf where it had been placed. Both of us are experiencing a great deal of tension at the moment. There are very few times that Jess communicates with me, and when she does, it is to remind me of how heartless I am. As for me, I have no idea what to do. It's a shame that I've upset Jess, but the doll really does give me the creeps. The fact that I put it in the shed makes me an idiot, doesn't it? That frightening doll is staring at me all the time. How can I set things right so that I don't have to suffer through it? Following the episode with the shed, I came to the conclusion that I needed to gain a deeper comprehension of Jess's relationship with the doll. I urged her to elaborate on its history and explain the reasons why it held such a significance for her. But a revelation was made by Jess on the fact that the doll has been handed down from generation to generation within her family by the women. For as long as she could remember, her grandmother had maintained that it was a guardian, keeping the family safe and watching over them. This was something that Jess had a strong belief in, and the doll was her method of maintaining a connection to her grandma who had passed away. The mere fact that I heard this made me feel even worse. Jess's doll was more than simply a frightening thing to her. It was a representation of the love and security that her family provided for her. I came to realize this. Despite my best efforts, I was unable to shake the unease that I felt towards it, despite my desire to be helpful. It was my suggestion that we strive to establish a middle ground. It would be possible for us to either keep the doll in a location that is less noticeable or establish some guidelines about the locations to which it can be transferred. Although Jess grudgingly consented to keep the doll in her room for a trial period, she made it very obvious that this arrangement was only going to be in place for a short amount of time. The situation appeared to be getting better for a few days. It was determined that the doll would remain in Jess's room, and the uncanny occurrences ceased. On the other hand, the tension that existed between us did not completely decrease. Despite the fact that I was still worried about the doll being in the flat at all, Jess felt as though she had surrendered too much. During the course of one night, I had a nightmare that seemed unsettlingly real. My name was being whispered by the doll as it made its way around the flat in the dream. Not only did I wake up in a chilly sweat, but I discovered that the door to my bedroom was slightly ajar. As I carefully made my way to Jess's room in order to check on the doll my heart was pounding, to my utter dismay, it was nowhere to be found. What I discovered was that it was facing the hallway and sitting on the kitchen counter. I decided that I could no longer handle it. Jess was awakened by me, and I informed her of what had taken place. Her expression was one of real amazement, and she stated that she hadn't moved the doll at any point. Jess admitted for the first time that perhaps there was something unusual going on, and we were both really taken aback by the situation. We came to the conclusion that it would be beneficial to collaborate with a local historian who specialized in folklore and antiques. After hearing our account, the historian took a closer look at the doll for himself. According to what she shared with us, such dolls were frequently associated with myths and superstitions, and it was not unusual for people to attribute incidents that could not be explained. Through her suggestions, she stated that the doll might be carrying residual energy from its past owners, and that in order to alleviate the tension, we ought to execute a cleansing ceremony. Jess was hesitant, but she ultimately decided to give it a shot. In accordance with the instructions provided by the historian, we carried out the rite beside one another. It was a peculiar experience, yet it appeared to draw us and each other closer together. I experienced a sensation of serenity for the very first time in what seemed like weeks. Following the completion of the rite, developments began to take place. It was then that the uncanny occurrences ended and the flat began to seem lighter. Despite the fact that Jess relocated the doll back to the living room, I found that it did not annoy me as much as it had previously. We promised to communicate honestly in the event that either of us experiences discomfort again, and we established certain boundaries. Jess and I were able to mend our friendship over the course of time. We discovered ways to make our living situation work and learned to respect each other's personal space limits along the process. Now, even though the doll continued to be a part of our home, we no longer perceived it as a hazardous presence. On the contrary, it turned into a symbol of our capacity to overcome our differences and support one another without exception. In retrospect, I have come to the realization that Jess and I were both attempting to cope with our own anxieties and attachments. On the whole, the doll was a trigger for our underlying problems, but in the end, it was beneficial to our development. I'm relieved that we were able to find a solution to maintain a peaceful coexistence, and I no longer feel like an idiot for wanting to safeguard my own mental tranquility. If anything, the experience educated us on the significance of not only communicating with one another, but also being willing to compromise.